People say blood is thicker than water, but they have never watched their own family tear them apart to protect a $10 million lie. My sister thought she could hijack our late uncle's forest cabin for a massive corporate scam and use guilt to silence me. She assumed I would just quietly surrender. She was dead wrong. You think this is just a normal land dispute? Keep listening, because the real betrayal goes so much deeper. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Sophie Grant. I am 31 years old, and for the past 6 years, I have worked as a senior risk analyst for Aethirus Dynamics. My entire career is built on identifying anomalies, sniffing out bad investments, and calculating the exact moment a situation is about to go terribly wrong. I look at data and see the truth people try to hide. Yet, despite all my professional training, I completely failed to see the massive, glaring red flags waving inside my own family. It started 2 months ago when I received an unexpected call from a probate lawyer. My uncle Arthur had passed away, and to my absolute shock, he left everything to me. By everything, I mean a massive, isolated timber cabin surrounded by hundreds of acres of untouched, old-growth forest deep in the mountains of Colorado. Uncle Arthur was a recluse, a ghost in our family tree. I only had vague childhood memories of him smelling like pine needles and motor oil, always tinkering with strange metal contraptions. Growing up, my parents and my older sister, Vanessa, spoke of him with nothing but sheer contempt. They called him the crazy old hermit. According to my father, Arthur had wasted his life hiding in the woods, obsessing over some do-it-yourself geothermal energy system he was constantly building and rebuilding underground. My parents viewed him as a humiliating stain on our supposedly polished, upper-class family image, Vanessa, who spent all her waking hours curating a fake, glamorous lifestyle for her hundreds of thousands of followers on social media. Used to joke that Uncle Arthur was probably building a doomsday bunker out of mud and twigs. They wanted absolutely nothing to do with him while he was breathing. They treated him like he was infected with a disease. That is exactly why the events immediately following his funeral felt so incredibly jarring. We had barely left the cemetery grounds, the dirt on his grave still fresh, when Vanessa cornered me by my car. She did not offer condolences. She did not shed a single tear. Instead, she held out her perfectly manicured hand and demanded the keys to the Colorado property. "I am going to need the keys. Sophie," she said, her tone dripping with that entitled authority she always used to bulldoze over me. "I am planning to host some exclusive healing meditation retreats for my influencer friends. It is family property anyway, so it makes sense that I put it to good use." Family property. The sheer audacity of those 2 words made my jaw clench. She had not spoken to the man in over 20 years, but suddenly his home was her personal spiritual playground. My risk analyst brain immediately sounded the alarm. The math simply did not add up. Vanessa despised nature. She complained about the lack of cell service if we even went to a city park. Why would she want to drag her elite friends to an off-the-grid cabin in the middle of nowhere? "No," I told her flatly, gripping the steering wheel. "I am not handing over anything until I go see the place for myself." She threw a massive tantrum right there in the parking lot, screaming about how selfish I was and how I always ruined her plans. But I rolled up my window and drove away. My gut told me something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. That Friday, I packed a heavy duffel bag, filled my gas tank, and drove 14 hours straight to Colorado to inspect the estate before deciding what to do with it. As the city skylines faded into towering, shadowy pines, a creeping sense of dread settled in my stomach. I expected to find a dusty, decaying log cabin filled with old books, cobwebs, and the quiet ghosts of a lonely man. I wanted a quiet weekend to mourn the uncle I barely knew, but who had somehow trusted me enough to leave me his only sanctuary. What I found when I pulled up to the clearing made me slam on my brakes so hard the tires skidded violently on the gravel. I sat in my car, staring through the windshield, my heart hammering against my ribs. There was no abandoned cabin. The rugged dirt path had been freshly paved over. The clearing, which should have been overgrown with wild grass and wildflowers, was now an organized parking lot filled with at least a dozen luxury black sport utility vehicles, high-end. Unauthorized security cameras were mounted on the ancient pine trees, their little red lenses tracking my vehicle's movement. The rustic wooden cabin I remembered from childhood photos had been aggressively gutted and renovated. It now featured massive glass panels, sleek steel accents, and a giant illuminated wooden sign near the entrance that read, Aura Geo Retreat. It looked like a high-end biological wellness center, not a dead man's secluded home. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I stepped out of my car, the cold mountain air biting my cheeks, and walked toward the entrance, my mind spinning with 100 different worst-case scenarios. The heavy front door was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped into what used to be Uncle Arthur's rustic living room. It had been transformed into a sleek, minimalist conference space with expensive lighting and modern furniture. And right there, standing at the front of the room, was Vanessa. She was dressed in a sharp, incredibly expensive designer suit, holding a tablet and gesturing enthusiastically toward a massive digital projector screen. Sitting in front of her were about 10 people in sharp business attire, holding sleek presentation folders. They were not her influencer friends seeking spiritual healing. They were Silicon Valley tech investors. I froze in the shadows of the hallway, listening in absolute horror as my sister pitched a multi-million-dollar green energy technology, utilizing a revolutionary closed-loop geothermal system. She was selling it as her own brilliant startup innovation, entirely omitting the fact that she was standing inside the stolen home of the dead uncle she used to mock, peddling the very life's work they had all called him crazy for building. The eerie, terrifying realization washed over me like ice water. This was never about a meditation retreat. This was a massive, calculated corporate hijack, and I had just walked right into the middle of it. I marched straight down the hallway, aggressively ignoring the polished new walls and the nauseating smell of fresh, expensive paint that had masked the natural pine scent I remembered. I found the utility closet right where it had always been, hidden behind a newly installed frosted glass door. I ripped open the metal panel, bypassed the shiny new labels, and slammed the main heavy-duty breaker switch down hard. The low hum of the massive digital projector died instantly. The pristine, overly lit conference space plunged into sudden, disorienting shadows, followed immediately by a chorus of confused gasps and irritated murmurs from the wealthy investors. I walked right into the center of the room, my heavy boots echoing sharply against the imported hardwood floor. "This presentation is officially over," I announced, my voice cutting through the dark room like a steel blade. "This is private property, and you are currently trespassing on an active estate dispute. I strongly suggest you pack up your briefcases and clear out of this driveway before I call the local sheriff to escort you off the mountain." The men in the tailored suits scrambled. There was no hesitation. Nobody with that much money wants to be caught in the middle of a legal mess. Within 10 minutes, the driveway was completely empty, leaving only the deafening, heavy silence of the dense forest and my sister, who looked like she was about to spontaneously combust. "Are you completely out of your damn mind?" Vanessa shrieked, violently slamming her expensive tablet onto the sleek presentation table. "I was 5 minutes away from securing a massive seed funding round that would change our lives forever. You just humiliated me in front of the biggest venture capitalists in the state." "You broke into my house," I fired back, my hands trembling with a rage so hot it made my vision blur. "You illegally gutted my inheritance, bypassed probate, and stole a dead man's life work just so you could play chief executive officer for a weekend." Vanessa let out a harsh, grating laugh that held absolutely no remorse. She looked at me like I was a piece of trash stuck to the bottom of her designer shoes. "Your inheritance. Oh, please grow up. Sophie, Uncle Arthur was a paranoid lunatic who squandered this prime real estate for 30 years. I am the one with the actual vision here. I am monetizing this useless pile of wood and dirt to save our family. You are just being a selfish, small-minded brat who cannot stand to see anyone else succeed where you failed." She grabbed her designer coat and stormed out, peeling out of the gravel driveway in her luxury sport utility vehicle, leaving me standing alone in the cold, violated house. But the nightmare was only just beginning. At exactly 10 o'clock that night, my cell phone vibrated violently against the wooden counter. It was my mother. The absolute second I pressed answer, the screaming began. There was no greeting, no checking to see if I was safe after a 14-hour drive. Just pure, unfiltered, deafening venom. "How could you do this to your own flesh and blood?" My mother sobbed hysterically through the tiny speaker, her voice shrill and wet with dramatic tears. "Your sister is bending over backward trying to build a legitimate empire, and you march in there and destroy it because you are incredibly jealous. You have always been so jealous of her shine." My father chimed in from the background, his voice a low, threatening rumble that used to terrify me when I was a child. "You are going to sign that property deed over to Vanessa by Monday morning. Sophie, this is not a negotiation. She is carrying the entire financial future of this family on her shoulders, and you are acting like an entitled child." "She is running a corporate scam," I yelled back, fighting the suffocating and heavy weight of their synchronized gaslighting. "She stole Uncle Arthur's property and his designs." "We paid for those renovations," my mother shrieked, the raw, ugly panic in her voice making the blood in my veins run ice cold. "Where do you think your sister got the $500,000 in startup capital to fix that dump? Your father and I took out a massive second mortgage on our retirement home. We gave her every single penny of our life savings. If you stubbornly shut down this project and ruin her investor relations, we are going to lose everything. We will be thrown out on the street, and it will be entirely your fault." The room spun violently. I pressed my hand against the cold countertop to steady myself. My own parents had risked their secure retirement to fund Vanessa's delusional fraud, before I could even process the sickening magnitude of their financial ruin. I heard a sharp click, followed by another voice on the line. Vanessa had silently conferenced herself in, "Listen to me very carefully, little sister." Vanessa's voice was deadly calm, entirely stripped of all her usual bubbly, camera-ready charm. "If you try to legally lock me out, or if you even think about calling the police to report this, I will go live on every single social media platform I own. I have nearly 700,000 loyal followers who listen to every word I say. I will post a tearful video explaining how the ruthless risk analyst at Aethirus Dynamics is a sociopath who is actively trying to evict her own elderly, sick parents and destroy a green energy initiative. I will tag your corporate headquarters. I will tag your board of directors. Your pristine professional reputation will be completely incinerated in 24 hours. You will be fired, and you will never work in the corporate sector again." I stood alone in the dark cabin, clutching the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. My chest tightened painfully. This was their classic playbook: push, manipulate, threaten, and guilt trip until the target breaks. They expected me to cry, to apologize profusely, to fold under the immense pressure exactly like I always did when we were growing up. But I was not that scared little girl anymore. I was a senior professional who dismantled hostile corporate takeovers for a living. And you do not win against hostile actors by throwing a noisy tantrum. You win by quietly outsmarting them. I took a deep, shaky breath, deliberately forcing my voice to sound terrified, fragile, and utterly defeated. Okay, just stop. Please stop yelling at me." I let out a carefully calculated, pathetic sob. "I did not know about the second mortgage. Mom, I am so sorry. Just give me 7 days. Let me drive back to the city, carefully look over the legal financials, and figure out how we can quietly structure the ownership transfer so I do not lose my corporate job over a sudden legal dispute. 7 days. Vanessa, just give me exactly 1 week to process this mess, and we will sign the papers." 7 days, Vanessa sneered, the arrogant triumph practically dripping from her words. Do not try anything stupid. Sophie, I am watching you. The line went dead. The heavy silence of the mountain cabin rushed back in, ringing in my ears. I slowly lowered the phone and wiped my completely dry eyes, the fake panic instantly vanishing from my face, replaced by a cold, clinical focus. I had exactly 168 hours to tear my family's entire empire to the ground. The moment the sun rose over the jagged Colorado peaks, I locked the heavy front door of the cabin, pulled all the motorized smart blinds shut, and set up my secure corporate laptop on the kitchen island. I had asked for 7 days to think things over, but I only needed one single weekend to entirely dismantle their fraudulent narrative. Working as a senior risk analyst at Aethirus Dynamics gave me high-level security clearance and access to deep financial tracking software that normal civilians did not even know existed. I fired up the encrypted virtual private network, cracked my knuckles, and went hunting. First, I traced the startup funding. During that horrible phone call, my mother claimed they had mortgaged their retirement home to support Vanessa. I accessed the county property records for my parents' suburban address. Yes, a second mortgage was indeed taken out exactly 6 months ago for the amount of $500,000, but the money did not go to a legitimate business account or into Vanessa's personal bank. It was wired directly into a shadowy limited liability company registered in the state of Delaware. I used my corporate software to aggressively peel back the deliberate corporate layers, cutting through the fake holding companies. The primary registered agent was not my sister, it was my father. Next, I dug into the intellectual property filings for the so-called revolutionary green energy technology Vanessa was pitching to those Silicon Valley investors. I gained access to the United States Patent and Trademark Office database and pulled the exact schematic blueprints her startup had submitted for review exactly 3 weeks ago. As the complex vector lines and engineering notes rendered on my high-resolution screen, my blood ran absolutely cold. The schematics were flawless, detailing a highly advanced, closed-loop geothermal heat pump utilizing rare subterranean thermal pockets. Down in the bottom right corner of the scanned digital document, partially smudged out by a clumsy digital eraser tool, was a faint watermark. It was a stylized letter A encapsulated inside a mechanical gear. It was Uncle Arthur's signature maker mark. Vanessa had not invented a single piece of technology in her entire life. She had literally photocopied a dead man's brilliant life work and slapped her ridiculous pastel-colored corporate logo right over his genius. But how did she get her hands on the original physical blueprints? Uncle Arthur was fiercely paranoid. He kept all his sensitive physical documents locked away in heavy steel. I pulled up the official county police incident report regarding his sudden death. The local medical examiner had officially ruled it a tragic, accidental death. On the afternoon of October 12th, Arthur supposedly slipped on a patch of wet moss near a steep, rocky ravine at the far eastern edge of his property and suffered a fatal plunge. The responding officer noted in the report that the heavy front door of the cabin was found wide open, and a massive iron floor safe in his study was discovered entirely empty. The local deputies simply assumed the crazy old hermit had nothing of value left to steal. I switched monitor tabs and opened Vanessa's public social media profiles. On October 12th, she had posted a heavily filtered, sponsored photograph of herself sipping a vanilla latte, geotagged at a luxury ski lodge in Aspen, which was situated hundreds of miles away from the cabin. But Vanessa was arrogant, and arrogant people are always incredibly sloppy. I bypassed her public profile and logged directly into our family's shared auto insurance portal, a mundane utility account I still had login credentials for from my college days. I checked the recent accident claims. On the exact evening of October 12th, at exactly 7:45 in the evening, Vanessa filed a minor damage claim for a luxury rental vehicle. She claimed a wild deer had clipped her front bumper. The official police report attached to that specific insurance claim listed the exact geographic coordinates of the incident. The crash occurred on a rural, unpaved dirt road exactly 4 miles south of Uncle Arthur's driveway. She was there, on the very day he plunged to his violent death. My sister was within walking distance of the fatal ravine, and immediately afterward, The priceless blueprints vanished from a locked iron safe. My lungs seized up. The room began to spin. This was no longer just a clear-cut case of corporate fraud or family greed. I was staring directly at a potential homicide. I violently pushed my chair back from the kitchen island, gasping for fresh air. The pristine, modernized, aggressively painted walls of the cabin suddenly felt like a suffocating prison cell. I needed to find out what else they had managed to steal, and more importantly, what they had missed. I grabbed a heavy metal tactical flashlight from my duffel bag and began tearing the newly renovated rooms apart. I checked behind the sleek new drywall panels. I pulled up the edges of the incredibly expensive imported rugs. Finally, I walked back into the cramped utility closet where I had aggressively cut the main electrical power the day before. The hired contractors had poured a thin layer of modern gray concrete over the old wooden floor to stabilize the new server racks. But right near the main geothermal intake pipe, hidden beneath a pile of discarded wire, there was a raised wooden access grate they had completely overlooked. I jammed a flathead screwdriver under the rusted iron grate and pried it open with a loud, sharp crack. A blast of stale, dusty, freezing air hit my face, wedged tightly between the thick polyvinyl chloride pipes. Wrapped carefully in multiple layers of heavy industrial plastic was a thick leather-bound journal and a heavy stack of tightly rolled topological maps. I carried the hidden bundle back to the kitchen, my hands shaking so violently I could barely untie the plastic wrapping. I opened the weathered journal. The fragile pages were filled from top to bottom with Arthur's cramped, frantic handwriting. The entries from his final few months painted a horrifying, heartbreaking picture of a brilliant man being systematically hunted by his own flesh and blood. May 2nd. One entry read, "My brother called my landline again. He somehow got hold of the deep core geological survey I commissioned last winter. He knows about the subterranean veins. He knows exactly what is sleeping under the roots." I unrolled the large topological maps and flattened them on the counter. They were not just standard elevation charts of the pine forest. They were incredibly detailed, deep core mineral surveys. The land beneath the cabin and the surrounding hundreds of acres of untouched forest was sitting directly on top of one of the largest untapped deposits of neodymium and dysprosium in the entire state. Rare earth minerals, the absolute essential, incredibly expensive raw materials required to manufacture electric vehicle batteries, military defense drones, and modern smartphones. The geothermal energy system was a brilliant invention, but it was just a tiny fraction of the true financial value. The land itself was worth tens of millions of dollars to the right global mining conglomerate. I flipped frantically through the fragile journal to the very final entry, dated just 2 days before his fatal fall by the ravine. "They are going to bleed this beautiful forest dry," Arthur wrote, his pen pressing so hard it had actually torn through the thick paper. "My brother demanded I sell him the property deed for a fraction of its true worth, or he will report my off-the-grid infrastructure to the federal authorities and have the land legally seized by the government. He and his wife are orchestrating this whole nightmare. They are using Vanessa's pathetic little startup company as a Trojan horse. Once she secures the corporate backing and the land is legally cleared of my name, they will bulldoze the entire ecosystem, strip mine the valley until it is nothing but ash, and take the massive profits for themselves. I will not let them destroy this sanctuary. I am changing the legal will today. I am leaving the estate to the only person in this wretched, greedy family who actually knows how to read the fine print. I am leaving it all to Sophie. She is a risk analyst. She will see the trap. She will stop them." A profound, chilling silence wrapped tightly around me. The disjointed pieces of the puzzle slammed together with sickening, devastating clarity. My parents were not the tragic, desperate, elderly victims of Vanessa's reckless ambition. They were the brilliant, ruthless puppet masters pulling every single string behind the curtain. They had weaponized Vanessa's desperate, pathetic need for internet fame, using her as the glamorous, entirely clueless face of a fraudulent green energy company to mask their true intentions. That second mortgage was not a sacrifice for their daughter. It was the seed money to secretly launch a massive, illegal strip mining operation. They had staged that entire theatrical performance on the phone, using thick guilt, loud screaming, and fake threats of homelessness to forcefully manipulate me into handing over the keys to a literal gold mine. And Uncle Arthur had known, in his final desperate hours, knowing his own brother was closing in for the kill, he had played his ultimate last card. He used me as his final, unyielding line of defense against the bottomless greed of our own family. I slowly closed the leather journal. The terrified, vulnerable little sister who had cried on the phone last night was officially dead and buried. In her place was a woman holding enough explosive, undeniable evidence to send her entire bloodline to federal prison for a very long time. They wanted to play a high-stakes game of corporate leverage and psychological warfare. They were about to find out exactly why my company paid me a massive salary to ruthlessly ruin people's lives. I sat in the dim light of the kitchen, the heavy leather journal resting in my lap. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to dial 911, to hand over the insurance reports, the geological maps, and the diary to the state police. But my meticulous legal training violently pulled me back. I had a powerful motive and a highly suspicious timeline, but I lacked the absolute smoking gun required for a murder conviction. A clever, high-priced defense lawyer would instantly argue the journal was merely the paranoid rambling of a reclusive old man. And the rental car insurance claim was just a tragic, completely unrelated coincidence. If I struck right now and missed the target, my family would easily slip away, destroy the remaining physical evidence, and leave me looking like a hysterical, grieving niece seeking petty revenge. I could not just wound the beast. I had to utterly destroy it from the inside out, so it could never, ever recover. I packed the journal and the maps, aggressively scrubbed every single trace of my physical presence from the cabin, and drove 14 hours straight back to the city. First thing Monday morning, I withdrew exactly $80,000 from my personal savings account and hired the most ruthless, terrifying estate litigators in the state of Colorado, operating in absolute, total secrecy. We constructed an impenetrable, ironclad legal fortress around the property. We transferred the physical deed into an irrevocable environmental preservation trust fund. The strict bylaws were drafted so aggressively that the land could never be sold, legally transferred, or commercially developed under any circumstances, regardless of any pending litigation, family disputes, or corporate pressure. The property was legally frozen in thick concrete. But my family was not just sitting idly by. They functioned like apex predators, and they smelled my resistance. By Wednesday afternoon, I received a thick, heavy envelope via certified mail. It was a formal legal summons. My parents and Vanessa had filed a massive, aggressive lawsuit in the Colorado State Civil Court, completely contesting my rightful inheritance. Attached to the frightening summons was a recently discovered codicil, a supposedly updated version of Uncle Arthur's last will and testament, stripping me of all rights and heavily favoring Vanessa. The blatantly forged document came with a fabricated medical affidavit from a shady doctor, claiming Arthur had been suffering from severe, late-stage dementia and that I had maliciously coerced a mentally incompetent old man into signing his estate away in his final days. They were actively, brilliantly trying to paint me as a manipulative predator. Their calculated cruelty escalated the very next morning. I was sitting at my desk at Etherius Dynamics, preparing to dive back into the secure corporate tracking software, when the Vice President of Human Resources, flanked by 2 armed corporate security guards, walked directly into my office. They sternly demanded my company badge and my encrypted laptop immediately. Someone, an anonymous whistleblower whose digital protocol address was conveniently untraceable, had sent a highly detailed, viciously fabricated dossier to the executive board of directors. The thick package falsely accused me of embezzling company resources, using proprietary tracking software to conduct illegal personal investigations, and engaging in severe corporate espionage. The allegations were severe enough to trigger an immediate, unpaid suspension, pending a full federal investigation. As the two security guards escorted me out of the massive glass building in front of all my staring colleagues, the absolute, burning humiliation swelled in my chest. My family had successfully cut off my steady income, my pristine professional reputation, and my primary investigative weapon all in one single, highly coordinated strike. I spent the next 48 hours sitting entirely alone in my dark, silent apartment, surrounded by piles of threatening legal papers, nursing a cheap glass of red wine. The heavy isolation was completely suffocating. I had no job, a massive looming legal battle that could bankrupt me, and my own flesh and blood parents were actively trying to destroy my entire life just to strip mine a beautiful forest. On Friday evening, my cell phone chimed loudly on the wooden coffee table. It was a text message from Vanessa. The words glowed brightly in the dark room. I told you, this land is mine. This weekend, the biggest Silicon Valley investment fund is coming to sign the contract to buy the whole project. You lose. I read that incredibly arrogant text message twice. A normal person would have broken down right there. A normal person would have cried hysterically, thrown the expensive phone against the brick wall, and surrendered to the overwhelming, crushing darkness. I did not shed a single tear. Instead, a slow, freezing smile spread across my face. They truly thought they had won, because they successfully cornered and silenced me. They had absolutely no idea that I had already infected the very beating heart of their entire fraudulent operation. During my frantic, terrifying search of the cabin's utility closet the previous weekend, I had not just found the hidden floorboard, I had also plugged a tiny encrypted remote access relay directly into the main control module of Uncle Arthur's intricate geothermal system. I reached over and opened my personal, untraceable tablet, effortlessly bypassed the initial firewalls, and entered a complex string of command codes. A small green light blinked brightly on my screen, indicating a perfect, unbroken connection to the cabin's mechanical basement hundreds of miles away. My family wanted to put on a spectacular, high-dollar show for the wealthiest investors in the country. I was going to give them an unforgettable, devastating grand finale. The trap was officially set. By 8 o'clock on Saturday evening, the isolated mountain clearing had been transformed into a scene of sickening, arrogant triumph. My family had pulled out all the stops to secure the final signatures on a venture capital contract worth $25 million. From my vantage point, hidden in the dark tree line, I watched the glowing glass windows of the renovated cabin. They had hired a private catering company from Denver, complete with white-gloved waiters circulating with silver trays of expensive caviar and imported champagne. A string quartet played softly in the corner of the expansive living room. The driveway was packed with luxury vehicles belonging to the partners of the most aggressive, wealthy investment fund in Silicon Valley. Vanessa was completely in her element, wearing a sharp, custom-tailored white blazer, holding a crystal flute of champagne, and laughing loudly with men wearing $50,000 watches. My parents stood right beside her, beaming with that unbearable, smug pride they only ever reserved for her. They truly believed they had won. They thought the aggressive lawsuit, the fabricated medical records, and the malicious corporate sabotage at my workplace had permanently locked me in a cage of fear and bankruptcy. They thought I was sitting in my dark apartment, crying over my ruined career, while they sold off Uncle Arthur's legacy to the highest bidder. At exactly 8:30, the string quartet stopped playing. Vanessa stepped up to the front of the room, tapping a silver spoon against her crystal glass to command the attention of the heavy hitters in the room. The investors took their seats around the massive oak table, their thick legal contracts and platinum pens resting right in front of them, ready to sign away millions of dollars. Welcome, everyone, to the absolute future of sustainable energy, Vanessa began, her voice dripping with practiced magnetic charisma. Tonight, we are not just signing a contract, we are changing the world. My revolutionary geothermal closed-loop system is going to make us all incredibly wealthy while saving the planet. Let me show you exactly how my brilliant technology operates. She raised a sleek remote control, aiming it at the projector screen. That was my cue. I did not knock. The heavy front doors swung inward with a violent, echoing crash that instantly shattered the quiet, refined atmosphere of the room. Every single head whipped around to face the entryway. The wealthy investors looked confused. My parents physically recoiled. Vanessa froze, the remote control slipping slightly in her manicured hand. I walked directly into the center of the blindingly lit room. I was not wearing the defeated, terrified expression they expected. I was wearing a sharp, charcoal gray power suit, completely composed and radiating pure, unadulterated ice. But the absolute terror that suddenly washed over my family's faces was not because of me. It was because of the three sternly dressed people flanking me. "Good evening, gentlemen," I announced, my voice booming through the silent room. "I apologize for interrupting the festivities. Allow me to introduce Special Agent Miller and Special Agent Davies from the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Economic Crimes Division, along with Director Hayes from the Environmental Protection Agency." The two federal agents held up their shiny gold badges, the metallic glint catching the expensive overhead lighting. The investors instantly stiffened, their hands instinctively moving away from the unsigned contracts on the table. Nobody in high finance wants to be anywhere near an active federal raid. Vanessa recovered her composure with the frantic, desperate speed of a cornered animal. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice shrill and trembling. "You have absolutely no right to be here, Sophie. This is private property, officers. This woman is my mentally unstable sister. She is currently under a corporate espionage investigation and has a restraining order pending against her. Please escort her off my property immediately." I did not argue with her. I simply smiled a cold, terrifying smile that finally made the blood drain completely from my father's arrogant face. "Your technology demo, Vanessa," I said smoothly, gesturing toward the digital projector. "You promised these nice gentlemen a show. Please, do not let us interrupt the magic." Without breaking eye contact with my sister, I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my encrypted mobile phone, and pressed the single green execution command I had programmed 2 days ago. Deep beneath the imported hardwood floors, the massive, intricate geothermal system roared to life, but it was not purring with the quiet, efficient hum Uncle Arthur had designed. Through the secret relay I had planted inside the main control module, I had completely inverted the pressure valves and entirely reversed the chemical coolant flow. A heavy metallic groan violently shook the foundation of the cabin. The wealthy investors gasped, gripping the edges of the oak table as the floorboards vibrated wildly. Then, the sleek, modernized ventilation grate set into the walls violently blew open. Instead of circulating pure, mountain-chilled air, the compromised system began aggressively blasting thick, acrid black smoke directly into the pristine living room. The immediate smell was entirely unbearable. It was a putrid, suffocating mixture of rotten eggs, burning rubber, and raw industrial sulfur. The investors leaped out of their expensive leather chairs, coughing violently and covering their mouths with their silk ties. Champagne glasses shattered against the floor as the white-gloved catering staff scrambled toward the emergency exits. "Turn it off!" Vanessa shrieked, frantically mashing the buttons on her remote control, but her system was completely locked out. "What did you do? Turn it off right now." "Your brilliant technology seems to have a catastrophic failure rate of 100%, I yelled over the deafening mechanical grinding noise. "But that is exactly what happens when you steal a dead genius's blueprints and hand them over to cheap, incompetent contractors." The heavy smoke alarms began shrieking violently from the ceiling. As the room descended into total, coughing chaos, I bypassed her locked presentation and mirrored my own tablet directly to the massive digital projector at the front of the room. "Gentlemen, please direct your attention to the screen before you flee the building," I commanded, projecting my voice so every single coughing billionaire could hear me. "You are not buying a green energy startup. You are buying a highly illegal, stolen asset currently under federal indictment." The first slide flashed onto the massive screen. It was the original, unedited blueprint for the geothermal pump, clearly displaying Uncle Arthur's distinct mechanical watermark and his personal signature, dated 3 years before Vanessa even registered her fake company. "Fraud," I stated loudly. I swiped to the next slide. It was a high-definition video clip. During my digital sweep of the cabin's network, I had discovered that the expensive security cameras my parents hired contractors to install did not just record the exterior driveway. They also recorded audio inside the conference room. The video played loudly, showing Vanessa pacing back and forth in this exact room just 1 week ago, screaming at our mother. I do not care if Arthur's name is still on the original patent drafts. The digital projection of Vanessa yelled through the speakers. We burn the old drafts. We bribe the patent clerk in Denver, and we push this funding round through. The old man is dead. Mom, nobody is going to check the math. The investors, their eyes watering from the sulfur smoke, stared at the massive screen in absolute horrified shock. Grand theft and corporate conspiracy, I announced, looking directly at the 2 federal agents who were now stepping forward, their hands resting cautiously on their tactical belts. I swiped to the third and final slide. It was a split-screen forensic analysis of the supposed new will my family had submitted to the courts. On the left was Uncle Arthur's actual, shaky handwriting from his hidden journal. On the right was the completely flawless, perfectly smooth signature on the legal document granting Vanessa the entire estate. Red digital lines highlighted the exact mechanical strokes. And finally, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly, unforgiving register. Felony forgery and perjury, that signature was traced using a digital light pad. The medical affidavit was signed by a doctor whose medical license was suspended in the state of Nevada 2 years ago for accepting financial bribes. The silence in the room, beneath the blaring smoke alarms and the sputtering black smoke, was heavy and explosive. The investors realized instantly that they were mere seconds away from signing their names to a massive criminal enterprise that would have destroyed their entire venture capital firm. That was the exact moment the absolute cowardice of my parents finally broke through their polished facade. They saw the federal agents moving in. They saw the $25 million deal spontaneously combust into toxic ash. They realized they were looking at decades in a federal penitentiary. My mother violently shoved Vanessa away from her. "We had absolutely nothing to do with this," my mother screamed hysterically, her face completely pale, pointing a shaking, manicured finger right at the chest of her favorite, golden child. She lied to us. Vanessa told us everything was legally cleared. She forced us to mortgage our retirement home. We are victims of her manipulation. She forged the documents herself, my father roared, desperately backing away from Vanessa as if she were carrying the plague, his voice cracking with pure selfish panic. I told her not to cut corners. I told her to respect her uncle's legacy, but she was entirely blinded by greed. Arrest her. Officers, we are willing to testify against her. I stood there, watching the sheer, beautiful devastation of it all. The impenetrable, united front of my toxic family had collapsed in less than 60 seconds. The people who had emotionally tortured me for decades, who had demanded absolute loyalty, were now violently tearing each other apart to save their own skin. Vanessa looked at our parents, her eyes wide, completely unhinged by the instantaneous, brutal betrayal. The realization that she was being entirely sacrificed by the very people who orchestrated the crime broke whatever fragile grip she still had on reality. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, rabid hatred. "You ruined everything," Vanessa shrieked, letting out a guttural, terrifying scream. She dropped her tablet and lunged entirely across the room straight at my throat. Her manicured fingers curled like claws. She never even made it halfway. Special Agent Miller stepped smoothly into her path. Grabbing her wrist with brutal, practiced efficiency, he twisted her arm sharply behind her back, driving her face first into the expensive, imported hardwood floor with a heavy, satisfying thud. The sharp, metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly around her wrists echoed clearly over the dying hum of the broken machinery. "Vanessa Grant, you are under federal arrest for wire fraud, corporate espionage, and forgery," the agent recited calmly, pulling her up from the floor as she thrashed and screamed obscenities at me, her perfect white blazer now covered in black soot and dirt. The wealthy investors did not wait around to watch the rest of the show. They were absolutely furious. The lead partner of the venture capital firm grabbed the thick stack of unsigned contracts from the oak table and ripped them entirely in half, throwing the pieces onto the floor. "You will be hearing from our legal department first thing Monday morning," the lead investor snarled, getting right into my father's terrified, pale face. "We are going to sue you and your entire family for every single penny you have ever touched. We will take your house, your cars, and your retirement accounts. You are completely finished." They stormed out of the smoke-filled cabin, pulling their cell phones from their tailored pockets, aggressively barking orders at their ruthless corporate lawyers to freeze all communications and prepare for a massive legal slaughter. I stood in the center of the ruined, foul-smelling living room, watching the red and blue flashing lights of the local police cruisers pulling into the driveway to assist the federal agents. My mother was sobbing uncontrollably, dropping to her knees on the floor. My father was desperately trying to explain himself to the EPA director, who was already writing out a citation with enough fines to bankrupt a small nation. Vanessa, mascara running down her soot-covered face, was dragged toward the front door by the FBI. As she passed me, she looked up, her eyes filled with a helpless, burning rage. I did not gloat. I did not insult her. I just looked down at her with the cold, professional detachment of a risk analyst looking at a completely worthless, liquidated asset. "I told you," I whispered quietly, so only she could hear. "I needed 7 days to process the paperwork." I stood on the edge of the gravel driveway, the freezing mountain breeze cutting right through my charcoal suit jacket, and watched the chaotic, flashing red and blue lights paint the towering, ancient pine trees. There were no tears in my eyes. I felt no profound sorrow or regret. I only felt the clean, heavy silence of absolute justice finally being executed. Vanessa was aggressively shoved into the back of a county police cruiser, her designer clothes ruined, her charges stacking up rapidly from wire fraud to felony forgery. My parents were not spared their share of the devastation. They were placed in separate federal vehicles, facing massive investigations for extortion, conspiracy, and acting as direct accomplices to a multi-million-dollar corporate scam. By Monday morning, every single one of their bank accounts, their properties, and their retirement funds would be entirely frozen by the authorities. But the ultimate, inescapable nail in their coffin came later that exact same night. While executing a thorough, court-ordered search warrant on Vanessa's luxury sport utility vehicle, crime scene investigators uncovered an old, discarded memory card tucked deep beneath the passenger seat. It belonged to her vehicle's integrated dashboard camera. The recovered digital footage captured exactly what happened on the evening of October 12th. It explicitly showed her vehicle idling near the steep, rocky ravine, and it captured the terrifying, muffled audio of a violent physical struggle right before my uncle fell. The county prosecutor immediately upgraded Vanessa's charges from corporate fraud to first-degree felony murder. She was never going to see the outside of a prison cell again. The professional fallout back in the city was swift and deeply satisfying. Once the federal indictments against my family were made entirely public, the executive board of directors at Aethirus Dynamics issued a formal, groveling apology to me. They not only completely cleared my name and reinstated my position, but they also immediately promoted me to the Director of Global Risk Mitigation. They realized that someone who could coldly and systematically dismantle her own toxic family's entire criminal empire was exactly the kind of ruthless apex predator they wanted leading their crisis division. Exactly 12 months later, the dust had completely settled. The legal battles were over because my family had absolutely no money left to fight. I utilized my new executive salary and the overwhelming legal leverage to officially establish the Arthur Grant Nature Conservancy. I legally bound the cabin, the surrounding forest, and the massive underground rare earth mineral deposit into a perpetual, untouchable ecological trust. The land became a permanent, federally protected sanctuary. No mining conglomerate, no corrupt politician, and certainly no greedy relative would ever be able to extract a single ounce of dirt from this mountain. I had permanently crushed the massive, toxic lie. I am sitting here right now on the rustic wooden porch swing my uncle built with his own 2 hands. The morning sun is just beginning to peek over the jagged mountain ridge, and I am drinking a hot cup of black coffee. The silence of the old-growth forest is absolute, broken only by the wind rustling through the heavy pine branches. I used to believe the old saying that blood is thicker than water, but sitting out here, breathing in the clean air, I finally understand the truth. Real family is not determined by shared genetics. Real family is built entirely on mutual respect, honoring personal boundaries, and protecting each other's core values. I successfully defended the only legacy that mattered, and for the first time in my 31 years of life, I am truly, completely free. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it, as an ad-free channel. Your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Maya Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we would love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you are listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.